All right, welcome everyone. Today we are going to be diving into something that I think is super relevant to pretty much everyone, how we choose our partners. And we're not just talking romantic partners, right?
Right.
We're going to be talking about all kinds of partners.
Yeah.
The people we decide to spend our time with, work with.
Exactly. We make these choices every day, and it's something we don't always think consciously about. But there's a ton of fascinating research, especially in cognitive psychology, that's revealing some pretty surprising things about what's going on under the hood, the forces driving these decisions we're making.
Yeah, like why are we drawn to certain people and not others? What's really going on in our minds? And for this deep dive, we're going to be unpacking some key studies from our source material, Pasted Text.
Really insightful stuff. We're going to break it down in a way that's, easy to grasp. No need for a PhD to follow along.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start with romantic relationships, because I think that's probably what most people think about when they hear partner choice. What can you tell us about how we decide who we're attracted to?
Well, one of the most interesting things is how closely tied it is to how we see ourselves.
Hmm.
Our self-perception really influences who we find attractive. It's not just about having this list of ideal traits we want in a partner. It's much deeper than that.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure. So there was this study done in 2006 with almost 1,000 participants in Ithaca, New York, and it really highlights this connection. And one of the main findings was that the way we view our own desirable qualities actually impacts how selective we are about our potential partners.
Oh, interesting. So if you think really highly of yourself, you're going to be pickier about who you date.
That's exactly what they found. Those who rated themselves highly on things like intelligence, attractiveness, or kindness tended to have higher standards for their partners.
Huh. Makes sense, I guess, when you put it that way.
Yeah, and the researchers found some pretty strong correlations. Their statistical analysis, these things called R-squared values, showed that self-perception accounted for a significant chunk of the variance in people's romantic preferences. Around 0.36 for women and 0.37 for men, actually.
Wow, so over a third of the difference in who people found attractive could be explained by how they viewed themselves.
That's right. And what's even more intriguing is that the relationship wasn't always straightforward, like a simple linear relationship, The more you like yourself, the pickier you are.
Okay.
It was more nuanced than that. Some of the more complex statistical models fit the data better, which suggests there might be some more intricate dynamics at play.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So what else did this study find out about how we choose our romantic partners?
Well, another major takeaway was strong support for the idea of likes attract, which basically means that we're more likely to be attracted to people who share similar traits with us.
Okay.
Think about it, things like attractiveness, values, social status. This study found much more evidence for this likes attract idea than for the opposites attract hypothesis, or even the idea that we're primarily driven to find partners with the highest reproductive potential.
So all those rom-coms where the quirky girl falls for the brooding bad boy are totally off base then.
Well, let's just say that real life might be a bit more complex than Hollywood portrays it.
Right. Makes sense. So if we're not driven purely by these evolutionary instincts, then what's the deal with this likes attract thing? Why would we be drawn to people who are similar to us?
It's really interesting, right? And there are a few potential explanations. One is that shared traits can contribute to a stronger foundation for a relationship. Imagine if you both have similar values, interests, and ways of seeing the world. It can lead to more understanding, better communication, and less conflict, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Less arguing about what to watch on Netflix or where to go on vacation.
Exactly. Shared values can create a sense of harmony. And also, think about how validating it can be to see yourself reflected in your partner. If they appreciate the same things you do, admire the same qualities in you, it can boost your own self-esteem and sense of belonging.
I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, I can see how that would be really powerful.
And this likes attract phenomenon fits in with a broader concept in relationship science called assortative mating.
Assorted mating.
Yeah, basically it just means that people tend to pair up with others who are similar to them in certain ways. It's been observed not just in humans, but in other animals as well. And there's some thought that this kind of pairing might be beneficial for evolutionary reasons, helping to maintain desirable traits within a population.
Oh, interesting. So we're not just attracted to similar people, we actually tend to end up with them.
Right. But of course, nothing is ever that simple. While this research adds a lot to our understanding, it's important to acknowledge that The likes attract principle doesn't mean we're always going to be perfectly matched with our partners on everything.
Of course.
There are always going to be differences, and navigating those differences is part of what makes relationships interesting and allows us to grow.
Absolutely. But I do want to go back to something you said earlier about how our self-perception influences who we're attracted to. Because that reminds me of some of the classic evolutionary psychology research, like David Buss's work from the late 80s.
Ah, yes, the cross-cultural studies on mate preferences.
Right. He found some pretty consistent differences in what men and women tend to look for in partners.
Right. Men often emphasizing physical attractiveness in youth, and women tending to prioritize status and resources.
Exactly. So how does this more recent research on self-perception fit in with those evolutionary ideas?
Hmm.
Are they contradicting each other, or is there a way to see them as working together?
That's a great question. And I think the way to look at it is that this cognitive research adds a really important layer to our understanding. It's not just about these pre-programmed evolutionary drives.
Right.
Our own self-perceptions play a key role in mediating those preferences. Like, imagine a man who sees himself as high status and successful. He might be more likely to value those same qualities in a partner.
Hmm. So it's almost like our self-perception acts as a filter on those more basic evolutionary drives.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a simple men want this, women want that scenario. Our own individual experiences and self-perceptions come into play and shape how those evolutionary tendencies actually manifest in our lives.
That makes a lot of sense. So if we're filtering potential partners through this lens of self-perception, what's the next step? Like, how do we actually evaluate them?
Well, there's this model called the ideal standards model that tries to explain this. It suggests that we all have these mental blueprints of an ideal partner. And these blueprints are based on specific dimensions like warmth and trustworthiness, vitality and attractiveness, and status and resources.
Right. So like our personal checklist of must-haves in a partner.
Pretty much. But how well does this model actually predict who we end up with? That's where things get a bit more complicated. A huge review of studies from 2014 found that these ideal preferences don't always perfectly predict our actual romantic choices.
So it's not as simple as comparing someone to our mental checklist and ticking off boxes.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Real life is messy. There are so many other factors at play, like that initial spark of attraction, shared experiences, the timing in our lives, and that elusive thing we call chemistry.
Yeah, chemistry. It's like the wild card in all this.
Totally. It can defy even the most well-crafted mental blueprints. And I think this is something important to remember. As fascinating as all this research is, it's crucial to acknowledge that human relationships are incredibly complex. There's no single formula that can perfectly predict who will fall for or why.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the cognitive factors involved in choosing a romantic partner. But what about other kinds of partners? The people we collaborate with, work with, or maybe even just the friends we choose to have in our lives.
Yeah. Shifting gears to social partner choice. This is where things get really interesting because here, different cognitive processes come into play. Our brains seem to evaluate potential partners in a different way when it comes to social collaborations versus romantic relationships.
Okay, so tell me about it. What are some of the key differences?
Well, one fascinating study from 2015 explored this. They had participants play this economic game called the trembling hand game.
Trembling hand. Sounds ominous.
It's not that scary, I promise. It's a game where you have to decide whether to cooperate with your partner or not. And sometimes, even if you intend to cooperate, your hand might tremble and you accidentally choose the non-cooperative option.
Oh, I see. So it introduces this element of uncertainty about your partner's true intentions.
Exactly. And the researchers were interested in how people reacted when their partner in the game didn't cooperate. Did they try to influence their partner's future behavior, like rewarding them for cooperation or punishing them for defection? Or did they simply choose to switch to a new partner altogether?
Interesting. Like, do you stick with it and try to make it work, or cut your losses and move on? So what did they find out?
They found a really intriguing cognitive split. When it came to deciding whether to try and control a partner's actions, whether to punish or reward them, our evaluation takes into account both what they intended to do and what the actual result of their actions was.
Okay, so like, if someone made an honest mistake but it still ended up hurting me, I might be more forgiving than if they deliberately tried to screw me over.
Exactly. We're weighing both the impact of their actions and what we believe their motivations were. So the study found that both intent and outcome significantly influence our decision to use what they called partner control strategies.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when we're deciding whether to just walk away from the partnership and find someone new? Is it the same kind of calculation?
That's where it gets really fascinating. The study revealed that our decision to switch partners relies almost entirely on what we perceive their intentions to be. The actual outcome of their uncooperative behavior had only a very small impact on our decision to move on.
Wow. So if I think someone had bad intentions, I'm much more likely to bail on the partnership, even if the actual harm caused wasn't that big of a deal.
That's exactly right. It suggests that when it comes to choosing our social partners, we're incredibly sensitive to cues about someone's underlying character. It's like we're constantly asking ourselves, is this someone I can fundamentally trust? Are their intentions aligned with mine?
That's really insightful. It makes you think about how crucial trust and shared values are for any kind of successful collaboration.
Absolutely. And this finding really aligns with what we know from evolutionary biology. Our ability to choose cooperative partners has been a major advantage throughout our history. It makes sense that we'd be wired to be really good at detecting those who might not have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, totally. Now, there's one more study I wanted to talk about that looked at partner similarity in a really big way. This one wasn't about those immediate cognitive decisions, but more about the long-term patterns of who ends up partnering with whom.
Ah, yes. The 2022 study using data from the UK Biobank, huge data set, over 50,000 couples. They were able to look at a massive range of traits, 118 in total, and see how similar partners were on those traits.
And what did they find?
Well, as you might expect, they found that partner choice does contribute to partners sharing a significant number of traits. 64 out of the 118 traits they studied, actually.
Wow, that's a lot. So we really do tend to end up with people who are like us in many ways.
But here's the thing. They also found that a lot of these similarities could be explained by other factors.
Oh, okay, like what?
Things like shared household income, similar health ratings, comparable education levels. These factors played a big role in why partners shared certain traits.
So it's not necessarily that we're consciously seeking out someone with a similar education level. It could be that people with similar education levels tend to move in the same circles, live in the same neighborhoods, and therefore have a higher chance of meeting and connecting.
Exactly. It's a really important reminder that partner choice isn't happening in a vacuum. It's embedded in our social and environmental contexts.
Absolutely. Like who we end up with is influenced not just by our own preferences, but by the opportunities and constraints of the world around us.
Right. It's a fascinating interplay of individual psychology and broader societal forces.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. Any particularly surprising details or broader implications that stand out to you from all this research?
I think what really struck me is just how much these large-scale studies are revealing about the impact of societal factors on our seemingly personal choices. Like, we think we're making these individual decisions about who to partner with, but it turns out that things like income and health can play a huge role in shaping those choices.
It's a good reminder that we're not making these decisions in isolation.
Absolutely. And I think this really emphasizes the need for more interdisciplinary approaches to studying this topic. To really understand partner choice, we need to consider not just psychology, but also sociology, economics, and even things like urban planning and public health.
Yeah, it's not just about what's going on in our heads, but also about the world we're living in.
Exactly.
All right, so for everyone listening, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into the science of partner choice? Well, it seems like how we see ourselves plays a surprisingly influential role in who we're romantically drawn to. We tend to be attracted to people who share similar qualities with us, maybe because it's validating or because it contributes to a sense of harmony and shared understanding.
Right. And when it comes to those social partnerships, the things we consider are different. Our brains seem to be really attuned to cues about a potential partner's intentions.
Yeah, like, can we trust this person? Are they going to act in ways that align with our own values and goals? Those factors seem to be really important when we're deciding whether to maintain a social connection or move on.
And crucially, we have to remember that these choices aren't happening in a vacuum. They're influenced by our social and economic contexts, the opportunities we have, and the constraints we face.
Totally. So as we wrap up, here's a final thought for everyone to chew on. Take some time to reflect on your own self-perception. How might it be shaping your romantic choices? Are you drawn to people who reflect back certain qualities you value in yourself?
And think about your social circles. What are the non-negotiables for you in terms of a person's intentions and values? What qualities make you feel like you can truly trust and collaborate with someone?
And finally, Consider the broader social and economic forces that might be playing a role in shaping your own partnership choices. How have your opportunities and experiences shaped the connections you've made? Lots to think about, right? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.